The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Frederick Valles. I'm the CEO and founder at Optimizer. And today it is my pleasure to welcome Phil Frost, who's going to be talking to us about how to improve AdWords profits with better conversion tracking. So Phil and his company came to Optimizer a couple of months ago and suggested we co-host a webinar. And I thought it'd be really relevant because Phil has been doing a lot of training programs, speaking a lot about AdWords. And I know learning about AdWords is always top of mind for our customers as well. So Phil is the founder and COO of Main Street ROI, where he does a lot of the training programs, and he also works directly with a lot of small businesses. I know many of you also work with small businesses, so hearing how he positions things like conversion tracking and sometimes more complex things like how to track call conversions, how he positions that to his clients, I thought it would always be interesting for us to hear as well as we deal with our clients on a day-to-day basis. So very happy to have Phil on the line. He's going to do some housekeeping introductions as well as far as recording and how to ask questions. But at this point, I'd like to welcome Phil and hand it over to him.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this webinar. Really excited to get started here. So let me dive right in to the housekeeping like Fred mentioned. So I think everyone's familiar with GoToWebinar, but if you're not, there's a questions box in the should be in the upper right-hand corner, and just type in any questions you have during the webinar. I'll either address those right away if it's relevant to the slide, or I'll talk about that later in the live Q&A. I always recommend everyone turn off distractions. I always put my phone on Do Not Disturb, shut down from email. Just get the most out of this if you're focused and not checking email. And I do want to do a quick poll just to see who's on. And that shouldn't take too long. You should see a poll right now on your screen asking, are you currently advertising with Google AdWords? I imagine most folks are. Is the case here. We've got 100% yes. So let me close out. And just curious in terms of the size of the campaigns. So you'll see the next question, what's your current or anticipated monthly ad spend? I did a webinar yesterday, and it was actually, everyone was under $1,000, so a lot of small campaigns. Looks like we've got a good mix here. From 1,000 all the way up over 50,000 a month, so wide range. And I think this last one's not going to be relevant if you are an agency, but if you are managing in-house or through an agency, okay, we do have some through an agency, about 50-50 here. Always good to see who's on the line here, and then we can tailor the presentation accordingly. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. Quickly go through what is conversion tracking, just get everyone on the same page. How you can actually improve your profits through conversion tracking, especially when you're talking with a business owner. That might sound a little strange, how tracking can actually improve your profits, but it is true. And then I'll walk through a conversion tracking case study to show you how we were able to generate more profit as well as more revenue per sale, and that was all by using conversion tracking. I do have a gift for everyone attending at the end, and I mentioned we'll have live Q&A. If you're wondering, who am I, why should you listen to me? Fred already gave a nice intro. So again, my name is Phil Frost, the founder of Main Street ROI, and we provide digital marketing services as well as training, like this training today. And we've helped over 2,000 businesses with their digital marketing. And my thought leadership has been featured in Forbes, MX Open Forum, as well as Mashable. And I'm also the very proud father of these cute kids here. That's my 3.5-year-old daughter, almost 4-year-old daughter, Violet on the right. And that's my chubby son. He's about 1.5 years old now. That's Emmett. and my beautiful wife, Erin, on the left. All right, so what is conversion tracking? So the way I like to think about it is just take a step back and think about the goal of your advertising. It's not to generate impressions and clicks. The goal is actually to drive leads and sales after those clicks. And it's very easy for businesses to get set up with Google AdWords, not properly, but they can go in and create an account, and right away they'll start to see impressions and clicks and get excited about that, but that's not actually the goal. They want to drive actual leads and sales after those clicks. So conversion tracking allows you to see what's happening after people actually click on those ads. And you can obviously measure number of leads and sales, and then you can get even further into it and start measuring the cost per lead or sale, which is definitely better than just the number. And if you can take it even a step further, and ideally you want to be measuring the revenue from those leads and sales, and you can do that all within Google AdWords. I always like to explain that you want to think about this like you're investing, not spending money. So I always cringe when I hear businesses talk about spending money on advertising. That's really the wrong mindset. You want to be investing in your ads. And when you think of it that way, you can't only look at the cost. So a lot of businesses get hung up on the cost and making sure that they're getting traffic for the cheapest amount of money, or thinking that a keyword costs too much. That's really only half the picture. Example would be if you are generating leads for $100 maybe on one keyword, and another keyword is driving leads for $150, it's easy to come to the conclusion that, hey, the $100 leads are better. That's actually not always the case, because it does depend. It depends on the revenue from those leads. So that's an important takeaway from this, important factor when you're advertising. Don't just hone in on the costs. Also make sure you're focusing on the revenue from those leads and sales. So obviously, to calculate your return on investment, you do need both the cost and the revenue. Right, so there are 5 types of conversion tracking that you can set up in Google AdWords. And I'll quickly go through them now. You're probably familiar with all of these. There's web form tracking. Most websites have a contact form or a free demo form, request an appointment form. Whatever forms are on your site, you can set up conversion tracking by adding the code to the thank you pages of those forms. And Google AdWords will automatically track how many people are completing that form. The other type is e-commerce revenue tracking. That basically takes it a step further, and not only are you counting the sales that you're getting, you're also tracking the revenue from those sales. Then there's website phone call tracking. So Fred mentioned this earlier. With Google AdWords, you can actually set up what's called dynamic number insertion, or DNI, and that's where when someone clicks on an ad and goes to your website, you'll show a different phone number on your website, and when someone calls that phone number, you can then track that back to the actual keyword and ad that was clicked on. And there's the ad phone call tracking, which is people calling from the phone number in the ad. And in that case, they're not clicking on the ad and going to your website. They're just seeing a phone number in the ad, calling that number, and Google will track those calls as well. And finally, I'll get more into details about this one, which is critical if you have an offline sales component. This is the offline sales import. So if you have a 100% e-commerce type business, you would not need this particular conversion tracking, because all of your sales would be tracked with number 2, the e-commerce revenue tracking. But if some of your sales are coming in via people submitting a form, like a lead capture form, and then you have a sales team that's calling those leads and converting those sales over the phone, you can actually import those sales back into Google AdWords and track that, how much money you're driving from those particular sales. I'll go into more detail in a couple more slides about that one. So that's a quick overview of the different types of conversion tracking you can set up. All right, so can conversion tracking really improve profits? It's a question you might be asking. And if you take a step back, it's important to think about these three facts about advertising. All ad clicks are not created equal. That should be pretty obvious. Only a small percentage are actually going to take action on your site. Typical conversion rates for e-commerce sites can be 1%, 2%, so very small percentage. Taking that a step further, all leads are not created equal. So just because you're driving leads, not all of those leads are going to be qualified. So some are going to be unqualified to buy, obviously. Taking that a step further, even the ones that do buy, all those sales are not created equal. Some of those customers are going to have a higher value, higher customer value. They're going to buy more, more frequently, or buy the premium version of what you're offering. And then some customers are just going to cost more from a customer service standpoint. So they're just going to have a higher cost, so overall lower profit for your business. So the key takeaway out of that is that just because you're getting clicks on your ads, or you're getting leads from the ad traffic, or even getting sales, does not mean your ads are doing the best they possibly can for you. You absolutely need to have conversion tracking, ideally tracking through to the revenue, so that you can tell that you're driving the most profitable leads and sales for your business. And ultimately, conversion tracking is going to tell you how you can get the most out of the budget that you have for your ads. And here are the three ways you can utilize the conversion data to increase your profits. The first way is to eliminate waste. That's the most obvious. So from your conversion data, you can go in and just pause the keywords on a search campaign, pause the placements on display, pause ads that are not performing. You can look at devices, either desktop, tablets, or mobile, see which are not driving leads and sales, times of day, days of week, as well as locations that are not driving profitable sales. So they might even be driving some sales, and you might think, hey, those are good keywords. But again, if they're not driving profitable sales for your business, then you're going to want to eliminate that wasted budget. Next, you can maximize your revenue per sale. I'll show you how we did this later on. In terms of maximizing the revenue per sale, you can then, let's say you have a fixed budget, you can allocate the budget to the most profitable keywords, most profitable placements, ads, devices, times of day, as well as locations. And you can see that if you're tracking the revenue, because you can calculate the total value per conversion and see which segments are driving the highest order values for your business. And thirdly, you can ultimately maximize the profit in your ad campaign, which would be the revenue minus your ad costs. And then again, just reallocate the budget towards the most profitable keywords, placements, ads, times, and locations. So here's the case study that I wanted to walk through. You'll actually see later on a graph showing that just by adding the conversion tracking, it allowed us to grow the profits by 455% and grow the revenue per sale by over 1,000%. And here's some background on this particular client. We're targeting customers in the US. It was both e-commerce, so there was an e-commerce component. You could buy products online, but there was also a traditional sales team for this particular business. So this is relevant for e-commerce type businesses as well as brick and mortar or service type businesses that are not driving sales via their website. For online, or the way that the traditional sales team would work is you would request a quote, and then you would then line up a call with the sales rep, have a sales call, and then the sales rep would take that order offline. They would not put it through the e-commerce system. So completely separate. You'd have e-commerce sales, and then you'd have these offline phone call sales. It's important to note that the majority of the sales for this business are actually coming from quote requests. So that was it's an interesting problem to have if you're conversion tracking. If everything's flowing through the e-commerce form, it's very easy to track that. You can just set up the e-commerce tracking with revenue tracking, and you're good to go. Things get a little bit more tricky when you have people request quotes and then transitioning to a offline phone call and then having sales after that phone call. That's creates that disconnect where it's no longer an online sale that the pixel is going to capture that sale. It's impossible because it's offline, and it's also it's not somebody directly placing a phone call. They're first going through the web form, and then the sales rep is that call to the prospect or customer. So here's what, before we started, here was the situation. We had e-commerce sales were being tracked. We actually didn't know the value of those sales. It was just set up so that each sale was getting tracked as a sale. So we would know the number of sales per keyword or per campaign, but we had no idea how much those sales were worth to the business. So ultimately, if that's what's going on, the only way to optimize the campaign is to treat those sales all equally. You could basically say the average order value is, let's say, $100 or $1,000, and then optimize the campaign as if all of those sales are worth $100. Basically, the only option if you're not tracking the revenue. And they were also tracking quote requests. Good to see. But we didn't know if any of those quotes were ultimately converting into sales. And we also had no idea of those sales what the value or size of those orders were. And we all know that all those leads are not converting to sales. So some percentage was, and you can certainly calculate an average conversion rate and use that. But again, if you do that, that means you're going to treat all of your leads equally. That is likely not going to be the case. You're going to have some quote requests in this case that just don't turn into sales. They're just unqualified leads. And you're going to have some that convert at a high rate and tend to purchase at higher order values. And that's critical if you want to optimize the campaign. So here's what we did. Really two critical improvements. Obviously, we set up the e-commerce revenue tracking, and that's to track the sales from the online shopping cart. And then we set up the offline conversion imports using what's called the GCLID, and I'll explain how we did that in just a minute. And that allowed us to track the offline sales from the online quote requests. Here's how to set up revenue tracking. If you don't already have this set up, you would first want to check if your shopping cart has this already built in. A lot of them do. It's just a matter of flipping a switch, just checking a box or enabling it. That would be really step one. If there is no way to just flip a switch, then check if your shopping cart has directions. I know BigCommerce has a page that just goes step by step and shows you exactly how to add this to their platform. And if you're using a platform that doesn't have those first two options, then still possible. You're just going to have to work with the developer, and they'll have to just the conversion script and put that on your website. Here's what that looks like. You go into Google AdWords, go to the conversion tracking, get this code, and then here is where you can edit that code. It's the Google conversion value, and in this case, I'm just showing you an example of PHP code. That's what that echo total value is. That's likely not the code that you would want to put on your site. That's just an example to show your developer. That's where you would put the actual order value into the JavaScript code or the conversion. If you're not familiar with code or that freaks you out, I promise this is not hard to do. Your developer just needs to know what the variable is for the order value, and then it's very easy to just put that right into the code. All right, next is the import conversions, and this was really the crux of being able to better optimize this particular campaign. And if you're not familiar with this, you definitely want to set this up for any clients or for your business where you have this offline component for sales. So here's how the import conversion works. First of all, every click on an ad is going to create this unique GCL ID or Google Click ID. It's just going to be a string of numbers and letters. It's like 10 or 15 characters long. So it's a pretty long code, and every click on an ad gets a unique ID. And that's going to be in the URL after somebody clicked on an ad. And then your developer can then grab that GCL ID from the URL and submit that through your web forms. And again, that might sound complicated, but it's very easy for a web developer to get code that's in the URL and then add it to a web form so that it gets submitted. And then ideally, that's going to go into your CRM like a Salesforce or Act. So that would be stored in your CRM, or if you're just getting, let's say, an email alert when a new lead comes in, you would then just take that GCL ID and put it in a spreadsheet. That works perfectly fine. And then your team is going to sell over the phone or even in person or even via email, however your sales process goes. You now have the contact information as well as that unique ID. And then once you make a sale, you're going to import that GCL ID of the sale back into Google AdWords, ideally along with the revenue of that sale. Might have, let's say you had 10 sales in September, you'd have, and they came from Google AdWords, you'd have GCL ID for those 10 sales in a spreadsheet, and then you'd have another column for how much those sales were worth. And the beauty of this is Google automatically attributes that conversion data to the correct keywords and ads and placements from where that traffic came from. And that's because, again, every ad has that, or every click on the ad has a unique ID. So that makes it possible for Google to match all of the GCL IDs that you have back to that original click. example of an import sheet, and this is something you would get from Google AdWords. They give you a template like this, and you can see in column B, those are the Google click IDs. You can see they're long, some are shorter. That's just automatically generated from Google. And then column D is the conversion value. So you can see first one was worth $413.44. And then you can go down the list there. And then column E is the conversion time. So you do have to have a timestamp, and that also helps Google map that up. Okay, so here's what this looks like in Google AdWords. This is a campaign. This is on the campaign tab, so campaigns report, and what I'm doing here is segmenting by conversion name. So that's why we have the campaign data at the top, and then we have conversions along the left column here. These are all different names of different conversions. And you can see this one right here, GCLID import dash purchase. Those are all the imported GCLID conversions. And then this next column here is the total conversion value. That's where we get that. That's from the imported values. And then we've got all the metrics that you're probably familiar with. We've got the cost per conversion here. The value conversion, that's just going to be the total value divided by the conversions. And this is actually a custom column that I would recommend you create. You can now create custom columns in Google AdWords reports. And what we did here, this is just the profit per conversion, so it's the revenue minus the cost of those conversions. You can see the profit per conversion is about $2,000 for this particular time range. And what's interesting to note here, you can also see the average cost per conversion is $34. And I talk a lot about this in my AdWords training. It's important not look at aggregate data. First line here is the aggregate data, and you can see the total cost, the total conversion value, all of your conversions, and then it all gets rolled up into this one cost per conversion. So this 3486 doesn't really tell you anything unless you only have one conversion set up. But once you start getting multiple conversions in your account, that aggregate number doesn't really tell you much, especially when you have some conversions are leads and some conversions are sales. It's really important to segment by conversion and then look at each segment separately. So if we look at this campaign, it might look like we have a great cost per conversion, but that's not really the case across the board. There are some conversion types where the cost per conversion is really high, like $8.75. These quick quotes is what's really driving down the cost per conversion. And then you can see the actual sales. So these import sales, once you isolate that, then you can see exactly what the cost per sale is. That's really the number we want to look at. Okay, so here I want to go through the case study results. Here's what we found once we started digging into this data. So again, when we started, we didn't have any e-commerce revenue data, and we didn't have any data on what happened after we got quote requests. We were just treating all the sales, e-commerce sales equally. We were treating the quote requests equally. And what we found pretty quickly was that there were some keywords that were losing money even though they were driving sales. That was a big aha moment for us. And then another big one was that some keywords were driving quote requests, but they weren't actually leading to sales. And that was really a game changer for this particular account. Because again, previously optimizing the campaign as if all leads were equal, and if we were driving leads, we would keep promoting that keyword and add. And in reality, some of those quote requests were just not generating sales business. So let me take a look at an example here. So here's some keyword data, and this is without revenue. So this is what the report would look like before, when we didn't have any e-commerce sales data or any quote request sales data. We would just optimize based on the cost per conversion, and we would again treat everything equally, and we would use average. And let's say that if we had a cost per conversion under $100, then that was good. This keyword looks great. We've got 9 conversions for only $94 per conversion. And then you layer on the sales data, and you can see what's happening here is we're getting 9 conversions under our cost per conversion, our target cost per conversion, which looks good. But unfortunately, the value per conversion is only $80. It's not at the average that we think our sales are coming in at. So what's happening here is this keyword is actually not profitable. You can see the total conversion value is only $7.25 versus the total cost of $8.48. While everything looks great, you're optimizing for the cost per conversion. When you layer on the value, that's where you can really isolate some of those keywords that are really just wasting your budget, and you can pause those, reallocate that budget. So again, just clarifying that the revenue per sale in this example here is too low, so that keyword's not profitable. I saw a question come here from Matthias. What are quote requests? So quote request for this client is someone completing a form on the site to get a quote for their product versus just using on their site using the e-commerce shopping and buying online. So there's basically 2 ways to make a sale for this client. People will just go and make the sale on their own on the site, and other people will basically do like a custom quote request. All right, so here's 2 keywords. I grade them out there. Keyword 1, keyword 2. And here's that quick quote. So that's just a name of that conversion. So again, this report is segmented by conversion name. We've got quick quotes. We've got 50 of those, and the cost of those quick quotes is only $54. So that looks great, but you'll also notice that there are no GCLID imports. So we've spent $815 on this keyword, 551 clicks, so drove a lot of traffic here on this keyword, had 15 quote requests. It looks great from a cost per quote standpoint, but none of those actually led to sales. So this keyword is just driving a lot of quotes and basically wasting the sales team time. Here's another example keyword, not as much money wasted here, only $100. But again, 14 quote requests, a very low cost per cost per quote $7.74, but only one sale. So this is technically profitable, but a very slim margin there, and ultimately the sales team is wasting a lot of time talking to all of these quote requests that are just not generating the revenue to justify having that keyword. All right, so here's the graph of when we started. So you can see the orange line here is value per conversion. Everything before April 2015, they didn't have any value per conversion. There just wasn't any data there. So that's the first month with tracking here, April 2015. And other line here is the profit and loss. So that again is a custom column in the report in Google AdWords, and that is just the revenue from the conversion minus the cost of that conversion. So you can see the starting point here, where they were driving sales at $52.75 per sale, with a ad profit of $20,607 right on that first. And then more recently, August 2016, the sale average order value here jumped up from about $50 all the way up to $664. So a huge increase in the value per conversion. And again, that was done by just turning off the keywords and ads, anything that we could turn off that was driving traffic, that was driving low order values or no orders, and that ultimately raised that total value all the way up to $664 per sale. And then you can see the profit went from $20,000 all the way up to $14,000. So a huge increase. Obviously, this is a pretty long time frame. We did more work than just conversion tracking, but ultimately we could never have seen these results if we didn't have the tracking in place to show us what was actually working and what was just wasting the budget. So here's a recap of what we just covered. Again, conversion tracking is going to show you what happens after the click. That's really the key to why you need conversion tracking. I hope everyone understands the big takeaway here, that tracking the number of leads and sales is definitely not enough, and just tracking the cost per lead is not enough if you really want to maximize the profit in your campaign. You also want to consider the value of those conversions, or value per sale. And the two conversions that we were isolating in this presentation were really the e-commerce revenue tracking and the GCID import, so that you can track revenue from anyone that completes a web form and then turns into a customer after completing that web form. And an example of that is scheduling a demo, could be a quote request, scheduling an appointment, any type of lead like that where they first complete that form, and then maybe they come into your store or your office, and that's where you have that sale. As long as you're tracking that GCID back to the contact or the customer, you can then import that into Google AdWords and get the data that I was showing you previously. So I promised a gift for the attendees here. We've created a special AdWords bundle, and it's 2 trainings, step-by-step guide for how to set up a profitable Google AdWords campaign, as well as how to guide to optimizing your Google AdWords campaigns. Those are both $97. and we'll also do a Google AdWords campaign audit. You can see the total value there is $494. We're going to give that away for only $97 if you use this URL here, which is mainstreetroi.com/AdWords. With that, we will open up the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Phil. I think this is all very relevant given the changes to conversion tracking, and clearly you've had some great examples there of how you can make those accounts better. And if you're not doing conversion tracking right, then basically everything else you do in AdWords is kind of a moot point, because it's the foundation of everything, right? Tracking conversions.
Exactly.
So yeah, let's definitely take some questions here. I actually can't see the questions on my end, so hopefully you can.
Oh, let me open that up so that you can. I think I need to make an organizer do that. And I did see a question from Christoph. Is value per sale a manual goal? Not sure I understand. Oh, I think there might be some confusion between Google Analytics and Google AdWords conversion tracking. Christoph, just correct me if I'm misinterpreting your question here, but I believe you're saying, is value per sale a manual goal that you would set up in Google Analytics, because Google Analytics has goals? Okay, and I see that you said yes. So those are separate. What I was talking about today was 100% in Google AdWords. So you can set up e-commerce sales revenue tracking in Google AdWords by just changing the conversion value variable. I showed that earlier, and that's something that you just send over to your web developer. And then with the GCLID imports, that's just the value of your customer. You would just specify what that is and then import that along with the GCLID, and Google will automatically calculate the value per sale or per conversion.
So I'll add my take on that as well. So value per sale is not often considered a main goal of a campaign, but if you're actually doing sales, then return on ad spend tends to be a goal. So if you're doing lead gen, it's typically cost per acquisition is the goal. If you're doing sales, then it's return on ad spend, that's the goal. And so obviously it's important to get a sale that's worth more than how much money you spent to get that sale, right? So if you have a very high CPC and you only make a very small sale, then that may not be profitable. And so that was one of the examples that Phil gave, where you could be selling stuff, but you're just not selling the right stuff. And so this is where it's helpful to actually track the return on ad spend, because it will show you the keywords that drive those not highly profitable sales, so you can reduce the spend on those. And you would not just lower the bids necessarily. You might just stop advertising on those keywords, give less budget to them. Whereas the keywords that drive those big sales, those are the ones that you want to double down on. Make sure you have great position, maybe increase your bid and see how much more value you can extract from those.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Fred.
Sure. And I see another question came in about this whole process and how it might apply to car dealers.
Sure, that's a great question. So with a car dealer, if you're advertising from a GCLID standpoint, you could certainly have a form to collect contact information, to schedule some kind of appointment, maybe get maybe even promote some kind of offer if they complete the form, and then once they complete that form, that would then send you ID, and then once they come into the dealership, you would then need to match up their name that they sent through the form to the ID that you got from the form. So that would be one way to do it. You do need to get creative in terms of how you're going to entice people to complete a form. What Google AdWords just recently released, and I haven't tested this. Maybe Fred, you have, is the call import tracking. And if you're getting a lot of phone call sales, so people just maybe call the car dealership, you can actually document the phone number that they called using caller ID, and then the length of that phone call, and then you import that back into Google AdWords, and Google can match that back to the keywords and ads that were clicked on. So that's a whole nother aspect of conversion tracking that I did not cover. That's actually fairly new.
Yeah, and so I haven't played with that specific one either, but obviously there are a lot of call tracking vendors out there. Conversa, Invoca, Callmetrics, Marchex, If by Phone. All of those will provide some way for you to track calls back to the keyword that was clicked on initially. It is still a little bit tricky because even as a car dealership, you don't necessarily make that call on the phone. In fact, you probably never make that sale on the phone. You still want people to come in and sit down, negotiate, and then they buy it. So then it kind of requires that you tie the whole system into your CRM. But what's interesting is now you have multiple stages of conversion. So I work with a lot of clients who capture conversions of every lead that comes in, and then they sort of qualify it as far as which of these are good leads, and then finally which of these good leads actually became customers and bought something or signed up for a program. And so really the more data you have, the more granularity you have in terms of the conversions that you track, the more creative you can get about how to use that. And so you can do very simple stuff like maybe change your bid management based on who actually bought something. But there's also attribution modeling you can do. I mean, there's potentially some value to people who had that initial contact, and somewhere along the line you may have missed a touch point and they actually still bought something from you, but it's just that you couldn't quite quantify it. So being able to assign some value across that whole spectrum of conversions, it gets quite sophisticated, but it is really what the more advanced advertisers are doing to make sure they're getting the full value from their online advertising. And I guess that kind of leads into the next question here, which is, do you have any tips for clients that don't have a CRM system that integrates with Google?
Yeah, I highly recommend you do get something set up, because that will make your life a lot easier. If not, though, I have worked with clients where we're just using the Google Spreadsheet to document, in which case you would just need to work with that company, that whoever's taking the phone calls or getting the alerts that you have a new lead. That person just needs to be trained to document all that information into the spreadsheet. And if you're using GCL IDs, making sure that gets put in there as well.
All right, and in my mind, it's a bit of a question of how big is your effort. So obviously, if you're spending less than $1,000 on ads, it's probably not going to be cost effective to put in place a whole CRM system. That in and of itself can cost you then as much as how much you spend on AdWords. But really, I think the goal should be that you spend more than $1,000 a month on AdWords. In fact, a lot of the most successful advertisers spend way more than $50,000 a month. Now that may be out of reach for local businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, but still, I think everybody should aspire to be so successful that $25,000 a month is not going to sound like a huge deal. And then at that point, of course, adding a CRM system so that you can have that automation, direct integration, then that just becomes a small percentage of the ad spend, and it becomes a logical thing to do, because now you're kind of trading this off between, well, do I hire another person to actually track this manually, or do we just buy a system for a couple $100 that does it for us? But like Phil said, absolutely, you can use the completely free Google Spreadsheets to track it manually, but that's kind of a stopgap solution, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And then I think maybe another point that I'd like to make, I don't know if there are any other questions, but actually there are a ton more questions, so we'll get to those in a second. But the other thing is, if you do phone lead generation, give that phone number a call yourself once in a while and make sure it gets picked up quickly and gets answered professionally. I'm always shocked at how much money people spend on driving phone leads, and then people have to sit on the phone waiting on hold, or the person who picks up the phone is one of the lowest employees at the company, has no incentive to actually make the sale, doesn't even know what you're trying to achieve, and so all of these leads end up being wasted. And so then sometimes people blame the PPC efforts and they say, oh, this whole AdWords thing is too expensive, it's not generating sales, but really the fix for that would not have been to cancel AdWords, it would have been answer the phone better and train your people to actually be pleasant and really to sell the value proposition of your business.
Yeah, it's a great point. And to add to that, for all the agencies on the line, I would make sure you talk to your clients about that as well, because clients are very quick to say, oh, all these leads are junk, or we're not getting any qualified leads. And then when you go to the call recordings, you find exactly what Fred said. You know, calls are not getting picked up in time, or they're getting rerouted 10 times, and people are just getting frustrated. So, or they're being mishandled. So that's a great point. The call recording, I can't emphasize enough that that's a real eye opener for a lot of businesses. Just putting that in place. The unfortunate thing is it is a bit of a manual process to listen to all those.
Yeah, and so some of the systems like Conversa, they will automatically do some sort of an analysis on the call. They will not only look for certain keywords that indicate a potential sale, but they will also listen for the tone of voice and how pleasant the call was, how much silence there was on the call. And so based on that, you can actually combine those factors in any way that you want to come up with a score. And so initially that means you probably have to listen to some calls to kind of understand what corresponds to a good call versus a not so good call. But eventually there's many systems that can help you automate that. And by the way, Phil, Tom was asking the question, how does the GCL ID get mapped to a phone call? So I don't know if that's something you wanted to answer.
That's a great question. So that's what I was referring to. There's a new conversion, it's not really a conversion type, but it's a new feature in Google AdWords where they're now allowing you to import phone call data, and then they match it back into their system. And what you need to track is the caller ID. So you need to know what the phone number was from the person that called, and you need to know the length of the call. And then I believe you need to know the timestamp as well, so when that call happened. And then
Tom, and I think that's
data
the key
points,
point there.
they match it up.
Exactly, Tom, that's the key point, is it's kind of the timestamp of the call that's important. And so most call tracking systems nowadays, they can't exactly map to a GCL ID, but they can make a pretty good guess based on when the call came in. And so a lot of these phone call tracking systems, they give you a pool of numbers so that they can constantly rotate. So, you know, for the next 20 minutes, we have 15 numbers available. When somebody calls in, one of those numbers from the pool gets used, it gets timestamped, and then there's 14 other numbers available. And then after, you know, some time, that one number gets released into the pool again. So that way there's enough numbers in the system that they can cycle through them and kind of correlate those timestamps. It's not a precise science, but it's pretty close and it works pretty well. And that's kind of how all of that is done. Most of these solutions are pretty automated, so you don't have to worry too much about how to do it. If you are manually doing it and you're actually answering the phone, there really is no way to capture that GCL ID. And that's where you would have to use Google's own call tracking system, or one of these third parties that has built the technology on the back end, because it's not simple from a technology perspective, but it is pretty simple to use as a client. And then Simon was asking, is this going to be recorded? So yes, it's recorded, and Phil, I think we'll be sharing this with everyone who attended, right?
Yes, we should be able to get it out today, but definitely by tomorrow.
Cool. And then I think we have one last question that we'll take, and then any questions that come in after that, let's just try to answer those on email. We'll share our contact info here in just a minute. But Matthias is asking, we have a form on the page to schedule an appointment. How how are you able to track the real revenue of these offline conversions? How do I import them? How do I assign them to the right customer when they come into the office?
Great question. So what happens is when someone clicks on the ad, the GCLID code is in the URL. So they come to your landing page, and in the URL, there's a GCLID equals this long string. And then on your page, your developer has to add code to get that parameter that's in the URL. And then you can just add that. The developer will then add that code at the field in your form, and it will automatically get submitted through the form. So that sounds complicated, but it's actually really easy to do as as a developer. That's pretty simple. And then, so once that gets sent to you or to your sales team, you now have, let's say, first name, last name, email, and maybe a message, and then you also have the GCLID. So you have the contact info plus the GCLID, and let's say it was Phil Frost who submitted that form, and then I schedule an appointment for tomorrow. Tomorrow I come into your office, I sit down with you, I say, hey, I'm Phil Frost, and you take down my information, and I buy a new car from you. Then you could then go back and search your CRM, if you have one, for Phil Frost and see if I have a GCLID, or if you don't have a CRM, it's just in a Google spreadsheet. You can just search that sheet for Phil and different variations of the spelling of my name, and just see if you can find me. And that's how you would then match that up, and then you would know what the value was, however much I purchased from you. You could then put that into the spreadsheet, so you now have the GCLID and the revenue together. Does that make sense?
Right. So, and to kind of put that more in maybe technical terms, and hopefully I don't lose anyone, but basically the GCLID is your unique identifier that ties the click from Google and the associated keyword to some record within your company. What that record within your company is doesn't matter. That's up to you to figure out how can we uniquely identify this person once we do more business with them. And typically that's the name, like Phil is saying, but it doesn't have to be the name. So you only capture that GCLID at that initial stage, and then you or your salespeople, you don't have to worry about the GCLID. It lives in the system. And then further down the line, when that sale has happened, you're using that person's name as sort of the unique identifier of that customer within your company, and you're matching that back now to the GCLID. And that's sort of a technical thing, but it's not hugely complicated to do, so long as you captured it at that very initial stage. But you don't have to be propagating the GCLID throughout every experience. So it's not like the customer comes in and you're asking, hey, what was your GCLID, right? It already lives in the system, so you just have to ask that customer for the data points that you need to identify them. So either the name, the phone number, the email, however you like to typically do it in your business. And actually, speaking of GCLID, so does that change if the same person clicks a few weeks later? And yes, that does. The GCLID stands for Google Click ID, and that is a unique ID that gets generated actually technically not for every click, but for every time an ad is shown on the page. So if the same ad on the same page gets clicked multiple times, then it will be the same GCLID. But if the user does another search a couple of weeks later, they will get a new GCLID. And then, of course, it becomes tricky because now you have potentially multiple touch points with that customer. But you could still capture that, right? Because when the customer comes to your form, you ask them what is their name. That becomes sort of your unique identifier within your company. And now you could say, well, this customer actually had 2 or 3 clicks they did. And you know exactly which ones those are. And now it's up to you whether you associate the conversion to the initial click, the last click, or you start doing some complicated weighting between all of the different clicks they had.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little tricky. Because most people do have multiple touch points.
Exactly, and that's sort of the name of the game these days, right? Is attribution, and it's not even just AdWords, it's Facebook, it's display ads, it's how do you weigh all of these different touch points customers have to make sure that you're spending money in the right place to get more customers. But yeah, I mean, so some of this is pretty straightforward. Other stuff is a lot more complicated. And I see somebody's asking if Phil does one-on-one consulting. So Phil, do you want to tell us how people can get in touch with you and your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the bottom, go to our website, mainstreetroi.com. Feel free to take a look at any info there. And we've got quote request forms and some free information on there. You can shoot an email to info@mainstreetroi.com. And then just specifically for John, I'll definitely follow up via the consulting. So we can talk via email.
Great. And then, of course, if you want to get in touch with Optimizer, the email is support@optimizer.com. My email is frederick@optimizer.com. We do tools, so we don't really do one-on-one consulting, though we're more than happy to help you figure out how to use our tools and our automations. And with that, we've come to the top of the hour. Actually, we've gone a minute over, so I want to thank everyone for listening today and joining us. Phil, thanks so much for joining sharing your insights. It was very good. And we'll be sending a recording of the whole thing. And then please do feel free to get in touch with us if you have any other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Fred, for organizing. This was great.
Bye, everyone.